Hello, and welcome to A Journeyman's Travels. My name is Daniel Scheifler, Principal Consultant with Improving. Welcome. Now, we've been talking about the effective executive this season, and in the most recent chapters, we asked perhaps one of the most critical questions I've yet to come across. What can I contribute? And now, today, we're going to be talking about the next chapter which follows, and I think it is important to share this story before we get too much further into it. You see, there was a man who was going out on a journey, and he called to him his servants, that he might entrust parts of his property to them. To one, he gave 5 talents of money, that is, think bags of gold. To another he gave 2, and to the last he gave 1, each according to their ability. And then he went on his journey. Now the man who had received the 5 went out at once and put them to work. He probably won some, he probably lost some, but he always was working at it, and with them he made more money. He made back, in fact, another 5 talents. So also did the man with 2 go out. Now, of course, he had less to start with, but he also went out and made 2 more. The man who had just the 1 went out, dug a hole in his backyard, and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, their master returned and came and called them to settle an account with him. The man who had received 5 talents came and brought with him the other 5. He said, "Master, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have also gained 5 more." The master replied with joy, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in the few things. I will now put you in charge of many. Go and rule these 5 cities in my stead. Come into the joy of your master." So it was also with the man of 2. "Master, you entrusted me with 2. See, I have gained 2 more." And the master replied again, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few, and I shall put you in charge of many more. Go and now rule these 2 cities in my stead. Come and join the happiness of your master." Then came the man who had been given 1 talent. "Master," he said, "I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown, gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and so I went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is that which belongs to you." The master frowned. "You wicked and lazy servant," he replied. "So you knew that I harvest where I had not sown and gather where I did not scatter seed? Well then, you ought to have put my money in the deposit of a bank, so that when I returned I might get it with interest. Take the talent from him," he said to another servant. "Give it to the one who was given 10. Now, for the astute of you, you will notice that that was very much the parable of the talents from the Bible. And in fact, it had only a little of ad-libbing to help connect and flow the story. But this parable of the talents is deeply connected with the chapter we're reading today, which is making strengths productive. You see, the goal of any effective executive is to make the talents that men already have, and to weave them together to be a productive team. After all, the entire point is to scale the impact of what the organization can be capable of. But this can only be done in the light of the talents that the men have. Now, strangely, we do run into a challenge here, because very often we'll design roles that may in fact be impossible for one man to do. So suppose you're a growing company and you have a very promising young professional who then decides it's time for him to go on to greener pastures, but he'd become a linchpin in the department. How do you replace him? Very often, this is where an impossible job, so-called, emerges. It comes out of the unique blend of that man's skills, what he was already contributing, and we think, we'll just replace him with one guy. But that one guy who could do a little bit of everything, because he'd been there since the founding of the startup, tailoring a job to replace him is not the right way. That creates an impossible role. People are not interchangeable, so you can't just swap one for one. The chances of finding another one just like him are 1 in a few billion. So we have to expect that when someone leaves, the organization will lose some. And that we need to find a way for other strong and capable people differently capable, to come in and continue to serve the organization. So what do you do in the face of a potentially impossible job? You start with the objective goals. What should a person in this area realistically be delivering, and how would we measure it? If you can start with these objective goals, you're less likely to go with a sense or a feeling you might have about the role. And you'll have a very real thing to go through and look. It's like, is it ever reasonable to expect one guy to commit to these 5 major objectives? Maybe that's unreasonable. Maybe you need 2 guys. But then, critically, as you've developed this role, test your understanding. If your objective set of goals kills 2 or 3 good, promising candidates in succession, your role has been ill-defined. You need to rebuild it. Because it is a role not fit for real men, as tested by the 2 or 3 people it had just kaput. But here's one other thing you should consider. After all, this role is emerging most likely from a need in the company. Before the need, know who you've got. Rather than react when a player is suddenly needed, you should know in advance who can move into that slot. After all, you don't want to hire a guy to go start a new unproven effort. That's a lot of risk to take on all at once, not only in the new effort, but also in the new guy. Instead, promote someone who is promising and demonstrates their capabilities already into that role and hire someone to replace them in the old capacity. And to do this, you need to think about what the people you've already got can do, and therefore what they're likely to do well in the future. In fact, Drucker has designed a really great performance evaluation set of questions to help with this. And so he declares that the effective executive's performance evaluation starts with a statement of the major contributions of the person in their past and their present positions, and a record of their performance against the goals of those positions. So you can see not merely what he did, but how it measured up against what he was expected to do. From there, you're able to answer 4 questions. What has he or she done well? What, therefore, are they likely to do well in the future, based upon proven record? What's the gap? What do they need to learn to be able to get the full benefit of the strengths they're already exhibiting? One might have a great, deep technical knowledge, but he doesn't really have anything in ops. He might need to go learn that. One might be a great people leader, but he lacks technical chops, and so until he does that, he can't earn the respect of his peers. And all that's well and good. Those are seemingly obvious questions, right? You start with what they do, start with what that likely indicates they're going to do well, and what the gap is to get them all the way. And it's all focusing on their strengths, not their weaknesses, which I think is critical. But Drucker adds one more question, which I think is quite telling. He tells the executive to ask, if I had a son or a daughter, would I be willing to have that son or daughter work under this person? Why or why not? And that tells you something beyond just the skills. Skills as measured on paper could sound great, but the guy might be a butt to work with. Knowing that, he provides the test. Would I be willing to subject my own children to working under this man? Do I believe he will care for them? Do I believe he will build them up like I would want someone to? This tells you of a cultural consideration that must be made for all roles and of the performance. So much for the effective executive performance evaluation. Now, Drucker goes on in this segment to declare as one unbreakable rule the organizations must honor, which is to promote the man who, by test of his performance, is best qualified. Now, that applies equally to men and women, because if we are promoting incompetence in any sense, we are dooming the organization to failure. We cannot promote tenure, because then guess what you're going to get? You're going to get tenure, not productivity, not effectiveness. It must be measured by a test of performance for the best qualified candidates to be promoted. Do not promote them because the organization needs them. Promote them because they have been proven to be likely capable. Because yes, everyone is going to be promoted to a sense to their incompetence because they haven't done that role yet. We should not be surprised. But the man who learns, the woman who goes and takes out that extra training course to get the gap filled, that's the person you want. Now, you may see an objection where, oh, but this one is indispensable. We can't do without him. No such thing. We'll deal with that in a minute. But if you fail to promote the one who is actively showing the good of your culture, who is putting their strength to great use and has demonstrated they will be capable, you can guarantee to kill the culture. And the hardworking, successful player suddenly not getting rewards, they'll notice and they'll leave. Don't create that vicious cycle. Now, one of the things that can keep the great players down is because, well, the organization needs them right where they are. And that may be true. In fact, there are only 3 reasons Drucker can see for having an indispensable man or woman. 1 they're actually really not competent at all, and they're only surviving by the careful shielding of their manager. That would suck. But the only way to test that is to get them out from the careful shielding. 2, that person might be so capable it's not even believable because their strength is being misused to bolster their weak manager. We've seen stories of that all the time. And again, the only way to tell is to get them out from under that manager, doing something else. Lastly, and this happens, and I've seen it kind of happening in the Phoenix Project with Brent. Their strength might be so great that it's being misused to delay tackling a serious problem or outright conceal its existence, maybe not maliciously. It might just be as a result of they're really good at this, so they're the ones who do it. But in all of those cases, in every case, number 1, you need to move the indispensable man to provide a true test of what they are, so that the true character of the players involved may be known, whether it was a weak manager, a concealed problem, a weak player, or a misunderstanding. Now, with all of this, Drucker kind of lands pretty hard on the executives, going so far as to make a statement that making a strength productive is the moral imperative of authority. He echoes some comments that I've heard also from Dave Ramsey and other leaders like him about not wanting to keep donkeys in the same barn as the thoroughbred, right? You can't really have a mix of the great performers and the not. That team will end up being burdened, and the great performers will know, and they will feel and contribute less. But Drucker takes a slightly gentler approach, where Ramsey suggests that the thoroughbreds will drive the donkey out of the barn, and he's all for it. Drucker kind of says, hey, the experience for the player who's not able to contribute in their role, and they know it, really sucks. It has a significant negative impact, not only on the team, but on the man himself. Drucker calls this out and basically points to the cruelty to the man himself being forced to stay in a position where he is failing to perform. And so, to make the strengths productive of all the players involved is the job of the leader. They are supposed to see first, they are supposed to see sooner and farther than others. They ought to know and must work, therefore, to make the strengths they have available productive. But sometimes that can't be done because the player just doesn't have the capability. Here, it's relevant to bring back up that Drucker, even at the beginning, mentioned out in his introduction, hey, we really need to consider making promotion a safe thing to fail from. Getting promoted into a role where the player knows they're incompetent, but as a stretch is good. But preventing them from being able to come back to their old role and serve with distinction and still be honored is very, very dangerous because it actively encourages an anti-pattern of not mentioning that there was a mistake and therefore not learning and not improving. And it only makes the Peter principle kind of calcified in place. Now, so much for the leader's perspective. How does this moral authority or moral imperative of authority to make strengths productive apply then to an individual? After all, not all of us are going to be managers. Well, that admonishment to make your strengths productive still applies to you. No one will be more aware of your strengths than you are. Or at least no one should be. There is certainly a case for new in your career, you're not totally aware of all the things that are strengths. But your job is to learn what they are, and then find ways to give them full play in your current position. Because after all, not every strength will be called on at all times. But if you cannot help your position be enormously successful because of your unique blend of strengths, work with your manager or your mentors to begin building on the contribution that you can make. Some of that will, of course, go learn the technical side of things, or go learn this business aspect. But if you're looking at how can I contribute, making your strengths productive is the practical walking out of that question. In all of this, we've been talking about the strengths of people. And so I think it's very important then that Drucker closes his chapter out with this. The task of an executive is not to change human beings. Rather, as the Bible tells us in the parable of the talents, the task is to multiply performance capacity of the whole by putting to use whatever strength, whatever health, whatever aspirations there already are in the individual. Leadership, in a nutshell, is the influence of others' actions through a vision. It is the gathering together of many strengths to make thoroughly productive. I thank you for joining me in today's episode of A Journeyman's Travels, and I would like to leave you with this thought. What are you doing to make your strengths productive? And how do you know it's being effective? If it is the way you're answering, what can I contribute? How do you measure the contribution? As always, thank you, fellow travelers, for joining me. I wish you a safe journey in the week ahead.